They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary on Christmas Day in a modest home filled with leftover holiday cake and unopened gifts. 5 minutes after they went to bed, someone crawled beneath their house and lit the dynamite. The explosion could be heard for miles. By morning, the first martyrs of the modern civil rights movement were gone, and America would never be the same. This is a true story. Before we begin, I need to ask something of you. We're building something here at the Midnight File, a place where forgotten voices find their echo, where unsolved cases find their audience. We're trying to reach 100 subscribers, and if this story moves you, if it troubles you the way it troubles me, I'd be grateful if you'd join us. Hit that subscribe button. We're only just beginning. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? What corner of the world has brought you here to this story, to this moment in history that so many have forgotten? Leave a comment. Let me know. Because stories like this, they don't belong to one place, they belong to all of us. If you're still here, if you're ready to walk with me through one of the darkest nights in American history, do me one more favor. We'd love to see 20 likes on this video, 20 people willing to say, yes, this matters. Yes, I'm listening. Hit that like button and then settle in. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's going to take some time and it's going to hurt. On Christmas morning in 1951, in a small Florida town called Mims, two people woke up with hope. Harry Tyson Moore and his wife, Harriette, had been married for exactly 25 years. A quarter-century of partnership, of teaching, of fighting battles that most people wouldn't dare to fight. They were schoolteachers once, both of them, until the state decided that teaching black children about their own history was too dangerous to allow. So they were fired, blacklisted, cast out from the profession they loved, because they believed that education meant more than keeping your head down and accepting the world as it was. Harry Moore was 46 years old that Christmas. Harriette was 49. They had two daughters, Annie Rosalia, who everyone called Peaches, and Evangeline, the youngest. Evangeline was supposed to arrive by train the next day, December 26th, traveling home from Washington, D.C., where she'd been working. So the family waited. They kept the Christmas presents wrapped. They saved the celebration for when everyone could be together. It was the kind of small, tender decision that families make, the kind that seems so insignificant until you realize it was the last one they'd ever make together. That evening, after a quiet day, after leftover cake and conversation, Harry and Harriette retired to their bedroom. It was approximately 10:15 at night, December 25th, Christmas Day, the day Christians around the world celebrate peace on earth, goodwill toward men. And somewhere outside in the darkness, men who called themselves Christians, men who wrapped themselves in the robes of the Ku Klux Klan and claimed to be defending their heritage, their way of life, were crawling beneath the Moore home with enough dynamite to obliterate everything inside. At 10:20, they lit the fuse. The explosion, witnesses would later say, was the loudest sound they'd ever heard. Some called it the loudest bomb heard around the world. You could hear it several miles away, a sound so massive it seemed to split the night open. The house, that modest home where two people had just been sleeping, dreaming perhaps of their daughter's arrival the next day, of another year together, collapsed inward. The bedroom where Harry and Harriette lay was directly above the blast point. The floor gave way, the walls caved in. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, came down on top of them in a cascade of splintered wood and shattered glass. Neighbors came running. Family members stumbled through the wreckage, calling their names. What they found, I won't describe in detail. YouTube has its policies, and there are some images that don't need to be painted in full color for you to understand their horror. What you need to know is this. Both Harry and Harriette Moore were gravely injured. Both were alive, but barely. And the nearest hospital that would treat black patients was 30 miles away in Sanford, Florida. The local hospital in Titusville refused them, refused to save the lives of two people because of the color of their skin. Harry Moore died in the ambulance before they reached Fernald Lawton Hospital. He never made it through the door. His wife Harriette held on. She survived that night and the next day and the day after that. For 9 days she clung to life, fighting through injuries that would have ended most people immediately. But on December 31st, the day of her husband's funeral, she left the hospital against her doctor's orders. She needed to see him one last time. She needed to say goodbye. 4 days later, on January 3rd, 1952, Harriette Moore passed away. The doctor who treated her, George Stark, believed that a blood clot had formed after she left the hospital, and that clot had ended her life. So in a sense, Harry Moore took his wife with him. Even in termination, they couldn't be separated. Their youngest daughter, Evangeline, arrived at the train station on December 26th to find family members waiting instead of her parents. She learned what had happened in that moment, standing on a platform, surrounded by strangers, her world collapsing just as surely as the walls of her childhood home had collapsed the night before. She never got to say goodbye to either of them, and for the rest of her life, 85 years in total, she would carry that weight. The weight of a goodbye that never came. If this story is reaching you, if it's making you feel something, then share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Because too many people died in silence, and the only way we honor them is by refusing to let that silence continue. Now let me take you back. Let me show you who Harry and Harriette Moore were before they became martyrs, before their names were etched into history in blood and dynamite, because they weren't symbols. They were people. And people, real people, are always more complicated and more beautiful than symbols. Harry Tyson Moore was born on November 18, 1905, in Houston, Florida. His father passed away when Harry was just 9 years old in 1914, leaving him to be raised by 3 remarkable women. 3 aunts. One was a nurse, one was a school principal, one was a teacher. These women, they instilled in Harry something that would define his entire life: a passion for learning, for education, for the belief that knowledge was the pathway to freedom. In a time and place where black children were actively discouraged from dreaming beyond their circumstances, Harry Moore learned to dream in defiance. He became an educator. First, he served as principal of Titusville Colored School, a segregated institution where resources were scarce and expectations from the white community were even scarcer. But Harry Moore didn't accept scarcity. He taught his students about black history, about the great leaders and thinkers and artists who'd come before them. He taught them about voting, about civic responsibility, about how a democracy only works when everyone participates. This was forbidden, by the way. State authorities had made it clear that teaching black children about their own history, about their own power, was unacceptable. Harry Moore taught it anyway. In 1934, with the support of a young civil rights lawyer named Thurgood Marshall, yes, that Thurgood Marshall, Harry Moore founded the Brevard County branch of the NAACP. It was the first such chapter in the entire state of Florida. Think about that for a moment. In a state where racial terrorism was routine, where the Ku Klux Klan operated openly and without fear of consequence, Harry Moore stood up and said, "We're organizing, we're going to fight this." And people joined him, people believed in him. By 1941, Moore had become president of the Florida State Conference of the NAACP. Later, he became its first paid executive secretary, turning activism into his full-time work because teaching, his first love, had been taken from him. In 1944, he founded the Progressive Voters League, a partisan political organization designed to do one thing: register black voters, as many as possible, as quickly as possible. His mantra was simple: a voteless citizen is a voiceless citizen, and Harry Moore believed with every fiber of his being that the vote was the key to everything else: equal education, equal justice, equal opportunity. It all started with the vote. So he organized, he traveled across Florida, town by town, county by county, registering voters in places where registering could get you beaten or worse. Between 1944 and 1950, Moore and his colleagues registered more than 100,000 black voters in Florida. 100,000. Black voter registration went from 5% to 31% of eligible voters in just 6 years. Do you understand what that meant? In the South, in the 1940s, white supremacy depended on black people being excluded from the political process. It was the foundation of everything, and Harry Moore was dismantling that foundation, one voter registration form at a time. He was making enemies with every name he added to the rolls, powerful enemies, dangerous enemies. But Moore didn't stop with voter registration. He championed equal pay for black teachers. knowing that economic justice was inseparable from racial justice. He filed lawsuits against voter registration barriers and white primaries, legal mechanisms designed to keep black citizens from the ballot box. And he investigated lynchings. He documented them. He refused to let them disappear into the silence that white communities preferred. In 1944, Moore investigated the case of Willie James Howard, a 15-year-old black boy who was taken from his home, bound, and drowned by 3 white men. His crime: passing a note to a white girl. A note. For that, Willie James Howard was taken, and his life was ended, and no one was ever held accountable. Harry Moore documented every detail. He sent reports to the NAACP National Office, to the Department of Justice, to anyone who would listen. And what he learned from cases like this, what became undeniably clear, was that only federal intervention could protect black citizens from Southern racial terror. The local authorities wouldn't do it, the state authorities wouldn't do it. Only the federal government, if it could be persuaded to care, had the power to stop the violence. And Harriette Vida Sims Moore, born June 19, 1902, was every bit Harry's equal. She graduated from Bethune-Cookman College and taught 6th grade at George Washington Public School in Mims. While Harry's activism was public and loud, Harriette's was quieter, but no less powerful. She kept boxes of her own books hidden under her desk at school. Books about W.E.B. Du Bois, about Mary McLeod Bethune, about Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth. Books by Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes. She taught her students about these figures in secret, knowing that if the wrong person found out, she'd lose her job. And eventually, she did lose her job. In 1946, the Brevard County School District declined to renew the teaching contracts for both Harry and Harriette Moore. Blacklisted, punished for believing that education should empower, not pacify. One of Harriette's former students, Paige Wadley Bailey, remembered her decades later. She remembered how Harriette cooked lunch for the children every day, how she made sure no one went hungry. She remembered those hidden books, the secret lessons about black history and black excellence. She remembered a teacher who believed that her students deserved to know the truth about who they were and what they could become. Harry and Harriette Moore were partners in every sense. They fought the same fight. They took the same risks. And in the end, they paid the same price. If you're still with me, if this story is gripping you the way it grips me every time I return to it, then do something for me. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that button. Because we're building a library here, a collection of stories that deserve to be remembered, and I need you to be part of it. I need to know you're out there listening, bearing witness. Now, let me tell you about the Groveland Four. Because this case, this miscarriage of justice, is what sealed Harry Moore's fate. It's what made him a target too dangerous to ignore. On July 16, 1949, 4 young black men were accused of harming a 17-year-old white woman named Norma Paget and assaulting her husband in Lake County, Florida. The men were Ernest Thomas, Charles Greenlee, Samuel Shepard, and Walter Irvin. The accusation alone was enough to ignite a firestorm. Within hours, a posse of more than 1,000 white men had formed, armed and hunting. They found Ernest Thomas and shot him, over 400 times, 400. They claimed he was fleeing. They claimed it was justified, but 400 bullets don't suggest justice. They suggest rage. They suggest a lynching dressed up in the language of law enforcement. The 3 survivors, Greenlee, Shepard, and Irvin, were arrested and subjected to torture that I will describe only in broad strokes, because the details violate every standard of human decency. They were beaten. They were made to stand on broken glass with their hands roped above their heads. They were brutalized until their bodies broke, until confessions were extracted through sheer agony. But Walter Irvin, even through all of that, refused to confess to something he didn't do. He held on to his truth, even when it seemed like truth was the only thing left to hold. An all-white jury convicted all 3 men. Shepard and Irvin were sentenced to pass away by electric chair. Greenlee, who was 16 years old, received a life sentence. The case became a symbol, not just in Florida but across the nation, of how the Southern justice system functioned. It wasn't justice. It was a machine designed to destroy black lives and call it law. Harry Moore mobilized immediately. He worked with Thurgood Marshall, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund attorney, who would later become the first black Supreme Court justice, to organize a letter-writing campaign demanding justice. And in 1951, they won. The United States Supreme Court overturned the convictions, recognizing that the confessions had been coerced through violence, that the trial had been a sham. A new trial was ordered. But justice, real justice, remained out of reach. On November 3, 1951, just weeks before the Christmas bombing, a man named Willis McCall, the sheriff of Lake County, was transporting Samuel Shepard and Walter Irvin to what was supposed to be a pre-trial hearing. McCall was notorious. He'd been investigated multiple times for racial violence. He was brutal, shameless, and completely untouchable within the white power structure of Florida. On that November night, McCall pulled his car off a dark road. He dragged Shepard and Irvin, both handcuffed, out of the vehicle. And then he shot them. Shepard was gone, instantly. Irvin, critically wounded, somehow survived, and he testified later, clearly and without hesitation, that McCall had deliberately attempted to take their lives. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't self-defense. It was an execution attempt, plain and simple. Harry Moore was furious. He didn't just write letters this time. He demanded that Sheriff McCall be suspended from office and indicted. He wrote repeatedly to Governor Fuller Warren, dismantling McCall's lies point by point, reminding the governor that Florida was on trial before the rest of the world. And then, in a move that showed just how politically savvy Moore was, he reminded the governor of something else. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Florida's black citizens were still mindful of the fact that their votes had been the governor's margin of victory in the 1948 runoff election. In other words, we put you in office, we can take you out. Do the right thing. It was bold, it was fearless, and it signed his end warrant. Many historians believe that Moore's involvement in the Groveland case, and especially his public calls for McCall's indictment, directly led to the bombing less than 2 months later. The Klan couldn't tolerate this level of defiance. They couldn't allow a black man to challenge the authority of a white sheriff and expect to live. So they planned. They waited. And they chose Christmas Day, the Moores' anniversary, to send their message. The bombing wasn't random. It wasn't spontaneous. It was deliberate, calculated, and designed to terrify. It was part of a larger campaign of terror known as the Florida Terror, a series of 12 bombings in 1951 alone. The Moore bombing was the 12th. The local KKK leader had declared war on anyone he saw as a threat. The Catholic Church, the NAACP, B'nai B'rith, the Federal Council of Churches, anyone advocating for integration, for civil rights, for basic human dignity, was a target. In March of 1951, a black custodian named Melvin Womack was taken from this world. A black taxi driver was shot. An ice cream parlor in Orlando was bombed because it refused to maintain a segregated service window. This was the climate Harry and Harriette Moore were living in. This was the world they were trying to change, and they knew they had to have known that every action they took brought them closer to danger. But they kept going, because, as Harry once told his mother, every advancement comes by way of sacrifice. What I am doing is for the benefit of my race. If you've made it this far, if you're still listening, then leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me how this story is landing for you. Because I need to know that these words, this history, is reaching someone. I need to know it matters. Now the investigation. 7 decades of investigation, and not a single person ever stood trial for the assassination of Harry and Harriette Moore. Let that sink in. 7 decades, multiple agencies, countless hours of work, and no justice. The FBI took the case seriously, I'll give them that. By the evening of December 26th, just hours after the bombing, a special squad of 17 FBI agents had transformed Mims's only motel into a command headquarters. They interviewed over 1,000 witnesses. They conducted telephone surveillance. They analyzed evidence from the bombing scene. J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, took personal interest in the case, though whether that was because he genuinely cared about racial justice or because the unsolved Florida bombings were becoming a public relations nightmare is a question I can't answer. The first significant lead came on December 31st, the day of Harry Moore's funeral. 5 black residents of Mims reported that 2 white men had visited the Mims confectionery store back in July of 1951, asking for directions to Moore's house. The physical descriptions matched known KKK members, but knowing who might have done it and proving it in court are 2 very different things. The FBI pursued other Klan crimes, hoping to create leverage, hoping someone would crack and confess to the Moore bombing. No one did. By March of 1953, a federal grand jury in Miami issued a 12-page presentment describing the Klan as a cancerous growth and listing 19 separate violent acts between 1943 and 1951. But no indictments were filed for the Moore bombing. The statute of limitations for federal prosecution eventually expired, without charges, without justice. And then, 27 years later, something extraordinary happened. A man named Edward Lee Spivey, dying of terminal cancer, decided to clear his conscience. Spivey was a former high-ranking KKK member, and over the course of 10 meetings with law enforcement, he revealed that his close friend and fellow Klansman Joseph Cox had confessed to him that he'd planted the bomb. Cox had been paid $5,000 by the Klan, $5,000 to take the lives of 2 schoolteachers on Christmas Day. Spivey didn't just make vague allegations. He provided detailed information about the bombing, so detailed that authorities believed he must have been present when Cox planted the device. He told them that Cox had been nervous after the bombing, worried that the FBI would track the $5,000 payment back to KKK leaders. And he told them something else. Cox had asked Spivey to lend him a shotgun. On March 30th, 1952, just 1 day after his second FBI interview, Joseph Cox used that shotgun to take his own life. The timing is damning. Cox had been interviewed by the FBI in 1952 and had denied any involvement. But before he could be questioned again, before Spivey's information could be used against him, he was gone. The state attorney's office prepared a grand jury case against Spivey based on his deathbed testimony, but the prosecutor who championed the case lost the next election, and the matter was dropped. Spivey himself passed away in 1980, taking whatever additional truth he possessed with him. In 2004, the Florida Attorney General's Office of Civil Rights launched a 4th investigation. They interviewed more than 100 people. They excavated the site of the Moores' home, and they concluded that 4 Klan members were likely responsible for the bombing. Joseph Cox, who allegedly planted the bomb. Edward Lee Spivey, who provided the deathbed confession. Earl Brooklyn, implicated in witness statements. And Tillman Belvin, also implicated. But here's the thing. All 4 men were long gone by the time the investigation identified them. Cox took his own life in 1952. Brooklyn and Belvin both passed within a year of the bombing, and Spivey was gone by 1980. In 2008, the FBI reviewed previous investigations and identified 10 additional former KKK members who might have information. 8 were confirmed gone, 2 could not be located. And in 2011, the FBI officially closed the case. The federal statute of limitations had expired. Even if a living suspect were identified, prosecution would likely be impossible. So that's it. That's the end of the legal story. No trials, no convictions, no justice. Just a file that closes and a case that goes cold, and 2 people who gave everything for their community, for their country, and received nothing in return except an early grave and decades of official indifference. But I want you to think about their daughters. Think about Evangeline Moore, who spent the next 64 years of her life trying to preserve her parents' legacy, trying to make sure the world didn't forget them. She worked tirelessly right up until her passing in 2015 at age 85. She never got justice. She never got closure. But she refused to let her parents' names disappear, and in that refusal, in that determination, there's a kind of justice that transcends courtrooms and verdicts. It's the justice of memory, the justice of bearing witness. If this story has moved you, if it's changed something in you, then share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like this, they only survive if we keep telling them. They only matter if we refuse to let them fade. Now, recognition. Because eventually, slowly, the world began to remember Harry and Harriette Moore. In 1952, just months after his passing, Harry was posthumously awarded the NAACP's Spingarn Medal, one of the organization's highest honors. But for decades after that, their names remained largely unknown outside of Florida, outside of civil rights circles. While Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X and James Chaney became household names, Harry and Harriette Moore were footnotes, forgotten pioneers. But in recent years that's begun to change. The Harry T. and Harriette V. Moore Cultural Complex was built on the original site of their home in Mims, Florida. A replica of their house has been constructed. The museum contains interactive exhibits exploring the Moores' lives and their era. School groups visit regularly. Tourists stop by. People are learning their names. Several of their personal effects, including a locket containing photographs of both Harry and Harriette, watches and a wallet, are on permanent display at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington. D.C. William Pretzer, a senior curator at the Smithsonian, called the locket the most poignant artifact in the museum's collection. Inside are two photographs. Harriette gazing into the distance, Harry looking directly into the camera, two people who loved each other, who worked side by side for 25 years, who believed that America could be better if enough people were willing to fight for it. And there's one more piece of justice, belated as it is. In 2019, Governor Ron DeSantis issued full pardons to all four of the Groveland Four: Ernest Thomas, Samuel Shepard, Walter Irvin, and Charles Greenlee. All posthumous, of course, too late for any of them to benefit. But the Florida legislature had formally apologized to the families in 2017, acknowledging that these men were victims of racial hatred and gross injustices. And Governor DeSantis, in his first use of the Clemency Board, urged it to grant pardons, calling the case a miscarriage of justice. He said, "For 70 years, these four men have had their history wrongly written for crimes they did not commit. While that is a long time to wait, it is never too late to do the right thing." Harry Moore was right. He was right about the Groveland Four. He was right about Willis McCall. He was right about the rot in Florida's legal system. And his willingness to say so publicly, loudly, 6 weeks before his end, cost him everything. But he was right. And 70 years later, the state of Florida finally admitted it. Before I close this file, before I let you go, I want to talk about Christmas. Because the choice of December 25th wasn't random. It wasn't just convenient, it was symbolic. Christmas, in Christian tradition, represents peace, redemption, goodwill toward humanity. It's a day of hope, a day of light, breaking through darkness. And the Klan chose that day, that specific day, to plant a bomb beneath the home of two peaceful activists. It was a message. It was a statement. It said, there will be no peace, there will be no goodwill, there will be no redemption for those who challenge white supremacy, not even on the holiest day of the year. But December 25th wasn't just Christmas. It was Harry and Harriette's 25th wedding anniversary. 25 years of marriage, of partnership, of shared struggle. They'd delayed opening their Christmas gifts to wait for their youngest daughter. They were celebrating love, celebrating family, celebrating the kind of ordinary, beautiful human connection that makes life worth living. And while they slept, while they dreamed, men crawled beneath their home with dynamite and took that away from them, took everything away. And yet, in a strange way, the Moors' sacrifice on Christmas Day has given that date a new meaning. It's still a day to celebrate peace and hope, but it's also a day to remember two ordinary people who did something extraordinary, who believed that all Americans deserved dignity, deserved the right to vote, deserved to participate in democracy, and who were willing to risk everything, to lose everything, to make that belief a reality. Harry Moore once told his mother that every advancement comes by way of sacrifice. What I am doing is for the benefit of my race. He understood the cost. He accepted it. And when the bomb went off on Christmas night, when the house collapsed and the ambulance raced through the darkness toward a hospital that should have been minutes away, but was 30 miles distant because of segregation, Harry Moore became the first martyr of the modern civil rights movement. Not the last, not even close to the last, but the first. He didn't live to see the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He didn't live to see the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He didn't live to see the end of legal segregation or the election of the first black president. But the foundation he built, the voters he registered, the legal precedents he helped establish, the moral authority he lent to the cause, all of that remained. All of that endured. And in 2008, when Barack Obama won the presidency, it was in part because of the work Harry Moore started 57 years earlier, the work of registering voters, the work of believing that democracy, real democracy, required everyone's participation. Their home in Mims, rebuilt on the original site, stands as a memorial not to violence but to courage, to the courage required to pursue justice in an unjust world. And the locket in the Smithsonian, with those two photographs, reminds us that behind every sacrifice in the struggle for freedom are real people, teachers, organizers, mothers and fathers, people who chose to risk everything for the rights and dignity of future generations. If you've stayed with me this long, if you've walked through this entire story with me, then I have one last request. Subscribe if you haven't already, like this video, share it, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, what this story means to you. Because we're building something here and I can't do it without you. We're trying to make sure that stories like this, stories that deserve to be remembered, don't fade into obscurity. We're trying to keep the files open. We're trying to bear witness. The case of Harry and Harriette Moore is officially closed. No one will ever stand trial for their ending. No one will ever be held accountable in a court of law. But the story isn't closed, the legacy isn't closed, because every time someone learns their names, every time someone understands what they fought for and what they lost, the story continues. The fight continues. On Christmas night in 1951, two people went to bed in a modest home in Florida, celebrating their anniversary, waiting for their daughter to come home. And they never woke up. Not really, not whole. But what they started, what they believed in, what they were willing to give their lives for, that didn't end with them. It's still here. In every vote cast, in every voice raised against injustice, in every person who refuses to accept that the world is as good as it's ever going to be. Harry Moore said it best, every advancement comes by way of sacrifice. And he and Harriette paid that price so that we could live in a world where black children could learn their own history, where black citizens could vote without fear, where justice, real justice, might someday be more than just a word. Their names are Harry Tyson Moore and Harriet Vida Sims Moore. Remember them, because they deserve to be remembered, and because the only way we honor the sacrificed is by refusing to let their stories die. This is Julian Cross, and this file, the Christmas Day bombing of 1951, the first martyrs of the modern civil rights movement, is now closed. But the questions it raises, the injustice it exposes, the courage it reveals, those remain open. Those remain with us, always, until the next file. Good night.